My daughter didn't include me in her engagement party, but she asked me to fund her honeymoon, so if I told you, you wouldn't believe it. A mother who was there for her daughter's every step and suddenly finds out on social media that she's been erased from one of the most important days of her life. Not an invitation, not a call, nothing. And just when I thought I had learned to live with that wound, she showed up at my door, smiling, to ask me to pay for her honeymoon. In that moment, I understood that love is free, but respect is not. And what I did next was my poetic justice. He saw it plain as day. A mother can be wealthy and, even so, feel empty. Caroline, a strong, put-together woman, saw the photo on her phone and her heart shattered. Engagement party, the gold banner said, smiling for everyone but her. The venue, the lights, the flowers, all perfect, except for the chair they never reserved for her. And as a life mentor, one knows that an absence is louder than the music. Her eyes clouded over, but not her judgment. She took a deep breath, like someone putting out a fire inside. Silence is also an answer, her grandmother would have said. And man, does it hurt. That day she learned that the screen shines, but it also cuts, like freshly broken glass. Look, my friend, there are pains that don't make noise, they just weigh you down. Caroline was in her kitchen, surrounded by the smell of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon rolls. The phone buzzed once, twice, 3 times notifications, laughter, toasts, tags. Her daughter, Mia, in a dress that looked like it was cut from a California sky. My girl is so beautiful, she thought, and guilt immediately bit at her. Why didn't she call me? There was no lost invitation, no misunderstanding, there was just a hole with her name on it. You learn that families don't just break with shouting. Sometimes they shatter with the whole, it's no big deal attitude. And it is a big deal, because blood calls to blood, and rejection screams louder. As someone who's seen a thing or two, I'm telling you, the first thing you want is an explanation, not revenge. Caroline dialed the number, with hands that knew how to sign checks and cherish memories. It rang for a long time. Too long. Until a young, hurried voice answered, "Mom, I can't right now." Silence. The kind of silence that breaks you out in a cold sweat, that leaves you with the question on the tip of your tongue. You can't or you won't, she thought. But she swallowed hard and said, "I'll call you later, honey." And she hung up with the kind of poise of a woman who wouldn't lose her class even on a sinking ship. Because yes, you can have a full bank account and an empty heart, there's no contradiction there. And that, sweetie, is also poverty, the poverty of affection that doesn't arrive on time. Caroline's house was large, but that afternoon it felt small, like a cave. The walls echoed with birthdays, after-school snacks, homework, Sunday dinners. In every photo, Mia with ribbons, with braids, at graduation, Caroline behind her, holding up the world. It's strange that this hurts so much, she told herself, and her soul answered. It's not strange, it's human. In America, we're taught to tough it out, to say I'm fine even when our backs are breaking. But the body doesn't lie. The coffee tasted bitter. The light felt heavy on her eyes. She opened a window and let in the warm breeze, as if the neighborhood was hugging her. And she promised herself not to make a scene. Not yet. Now, remember, where there's family, there are versions. A friend, Lauren, sent a message. Did you see the pictures? The party looked absolutely amazing. Caroline replied with a heart emoji, one of those that hides more than it says, because sometimes dignity is also written in emojis, just to keep from crying. The advice is simple. When it hurts, name the pain, but don't broadcast it to everyone. Caroline spoke to herself like a child. Today, you don't decide. Today, you just breathe. She put on a light cardigan, walked out to the yard, and touched the damp earth. The earth doesn't betray you. It holds what you planted. Sooner or later, it gives it back. Let me tell you something. Pride is sly. It disguises itself as strength. Caroline thought about calling her future son-in-law, but why beg for respect? Whoever wants you, invites you. Whoever doesn't, makes excuses, she remembered. A phrase short and sharp as a razor. In her head, her father's voice. Dignity is protected in silence, my girl. And that advice, so old, supported her like a cane on a steep hill. The pain continues. Yes, but it's less messy when you set boundaries for it. She poured herself another coffee, this time with a splash of maple syrup, so life wouldn't taste so bitter, and left her phone face down, like someone turning off a storm. But the heart, you know, is stubborn and curious. At night, Caroline looked at the photos again, searching for signs. She saw Mia's future mother-in-law, haughty, the center of the table and all gazes. She saw the fiancé, with a toothpaste-ad smile and firm hands on her daughter's waist. She saw a toast, heard cheers in her memory, which never mentioned her. Not a text, not a flower, not even an "I miss you," she thought, and her stomach tied itself in a knot. She didn't cry. She didn't give herself that luxury in front of the screen. She saved her tears for the pillow, because that's the only place that understands the language of the soul. This is where that neighborhood wisdom comes in. Seek simple refuges. Caroline lit a simple candle. No speeches. "Just give me calm," she murmured. Her voice small but firm. The flame trembled, as if it also felt the slight, and in that tremor, Caroline found a rhythm. Inhale. Exhale. Let go. Sometimes faith doesn't solve things, but it sustains you, and that itself is medicine. "Let there be light where there is now shadow," she whispered, and left the candle to burn. Because the night is long, but no night lasts forever. Don't get me wrong. Caroline is not a victim. She's a strategist of affection. She isn't lacking money. She's lacking respect. And that's a whole different story. She had friends. She had her volunteer work. She had her own world in order. But her daughter is the hero's Achilles heel. "If she calls tomorrow, I won't accuse. I'll listen," she decided, writing it in her journal. Wise people write when they hurt, so the mind doesn't overflow. She set a time. She set limits. She wrote a sentence. "My love is not negotiated. It is honored," and she slept with that phrase like a blanket. In the early morning, the quiet neighborhood seems to speak more clearly. Caroline woke up to the sound of a stray cat yowling on the roof. Even the cats announced themselves, she thought, smiling tiredly. She made a chamomile tea, went to the window, and watched Chicago light up. Life went on, just like the traffic on Lakeshore Drive. Rough, stubborn, inevitable. And in that flow she found a clue. What doesn't invite you, doesn't deserve you. It's not arrogance, it's spiritual hygiene, as the old folks would say. And she was going to stick to that, whatever the cost. Let me tell you something else. Because emotion also has a smell and a taste. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon, and that brought back memories of young Mia. Lopsided pigtails, polished shoes, Sunday laughter, warm chocolate chip cookies. Where did we take a wrong turn? She asked herself, without reaching for easy blame. Because blaming yourself is comfortable, and Caroline was not a woman who took shortcuts. She had raised her with love and with rules, in her own way, with mistakes. Yes, like everyone. She wasn't going to use her memory to punish herself, but to understand. Understand, to choose the next step wisely. Parties pass, dignity doesn't, she told herself, with the sun on her face. She opened the door to the back porch, letting in the murmur of the birds. Life has this knack for healing you while you breathe, if you let it. Caroline swept the floor as if sweeping away worries, little by little. Each sweep of dust was one less thought, one less open wound. And in that humble gesture, her spirit settled like neatly folded shirts. The house, once again, seemed like her ally, not her judge. It was time to get pretty on the inside. However, the story doesn't end there. No, sir. Mid-morning, a text message came through with that confidence that only family grants itself. "Mom, can we talk this afternoon? I need you." Her heart leaped, not from hope, but from intuition. When they need you, they look for you. When you're in the way, they hide you, she thought. And here, as a mentor, I'll tell you. It's wise to listen, but not to disarm. Caroline replied with elegance. "Of course, honey, I'll expect you at 6 o'clock. And she set the table not with food but with boundaries. Because yes, my friend, the first blow has landed, but the story isn't over. What's coming requires a cool head and a warm heart. Caroline isn't going to scream or cry in front of anyone. She's going to look them straight in the eye. And that look, believe me, weighs more than any reprimand. The city roared, cars honked, Life pushed forward, and in that push, the afternoon brought its own script, ready to break the mold. The uninvited party was just the prologue. The real chapter is just beginning. And when a dignified mother opens the door at 6 o'clock, things happen that nobody can imagine. Let me tell you something. The hardest part isn't the blow. It's the echo. Caroline spent days chewing on the question nobody would answer. Why? What did I do wrong? And those questions, believe me, they seep in like damp. She called once. Nothing. She sent a text, just the read receipt, no reply. You don't expect poetry, but you do expect a minimum of truth, even if it hurts. In the neighborhood we say, when there are no words, there's a hidden lie. And that worried her more than the party itself. The silence became her uncomfortable neighbor, stuck to the back of her neck. Look, people think money buys everything, but it doesn't buy respect. Caroline knew that. That's why she wasn't surprised it wasn't about resources. It wasn't that they couldn't invite her. It was that they didn't want to. And that's the poison. Mia didn't grow up in poverty. She had good schools, vacations, a solid roof over her head. That's why the blow hurt twice as much. There was no excuse of poverty, only of the heart. Whoever loves you makes space for you, she repeated like a mantra. But the mantra didn't soothe. It just marked the pulse of her anger. And the house, once again, felt colder. Don't get confused. Caroline was not a woman who chased affection. However, motherhood is a strange bond. Even if they make you bleed, you ask if they're okay. So one Sunday afternoon, she decided to go to Mia's apartment building. She rode the elevator up, smelling expensive perfume and memories. She rang the bell, and it was her son-in-law who opened it with that plastic smile. "Oh, we weren't expecting you," he said, barely opening the door. And that "we weren't expecting you" was the polite way of saying "we don't want you here." Caroline smiled, dignified, and turned around. Some gestures weigh more than words, and that turn in the hallway was one of them. Caroline didn't cry there. The rage held her up like a corset. On the street, the city air tasted like dust and distance. She ducked into a corner cafe, ordered a cappuccino, and just stared out the window. At the nearby tables, families were laughing, kids were throwing napkins, and there she was, thinking that her daughter wasn't an orphan, but she acted like one. You learn that contempt has many forms, and some of them wear perfume. The lesson was simmering, slow, like a stew that needs time. That same night, a short message lit up her phone. "Mom, I'm really busy. Talk later." The coldness fit on a single line, with no sign of affection. Caroline read it, sighed, and put the phone in a drawer. It was the sign that no voluntary explanation was coming. So she decided something. She wasn't going to beg for anything. Dignity isn't lost all at once. It frays, and she wasn't about to give up a single thread. Sometimes the answer is to wait, even if the waiting burns. What nobody sees is what happens on the inside. Caroline walked through her garden, touching the leaves as if they were pages from an old book. She thought about the times she defended her daughter at school, the nights she stayed up with her fever. Did she forget all that? Or did she never value it? She wondered. And as a wise man, I'm telling you, that's the most dangerous wound, the wound of ingratitude. Ingratitude doesn't make noise, but it leaves holes in your memory. She wasn't going to let those holes define her. If one thing was clear, it was that the story wasn't written yet. The neighborhood has a memory, and so do the neighbors. One of them, Nancy, approached her one morning. "I heard about the party, honey. What happened?" Caroline smiled without showing her teeth. "Nothing, just that it wasn't my place." That short sentence held oceans of sadness. And Nancy, who knows about broken hearts, squeezed her hand. Sometimes comfort doesn't come with solutions, but with company. And that, for that morning, was enough. Caroline started to notice patterns. Her daughter called when she needed something, but not when she wanted to share. Favors were a bridge. Affection was a barrier. And she wasn't naive. She knew how to read the signs. Pride isn't bad if it's mixed with self-respect. But self-respect isn't revenge. It's knowing when to close the door. So she stopped initiating calls, stopped sending texts. If they wanted her, they would find her. Don't think this was easy. A mother's love is stubborn. There were days when the impulse to dial was strong. But Caroline reminded herself, if I'm going to be part of her life, it will be because she chooses me, not because I insist. The loneliness settled in, yes, but in an orderly way. And orderly loneliness is sometimes healthier than toxic company. That's how I see it. Not every blood tie is a guarantee of respect, and that respect, for Caroline, was worth more than any party. The wound was still there, but it was no longer festering. Meanwhile, the city kept its rhythm. Caroline went back to her painting classes, went to the market, greeted the baker. Daily life was her silent therapy. She wasn't going to let one disappointment freeze her. But deep down, she knew something else was brewing. Family stories always have unexpected twists. And that twist, she sensed, would come from Mia herself. All she had to do was wait for the moment. And that moment arrived, though in disguise. One random Tuesday, Mia called, her voice sweet. "Mom, I miss you, and I need to talk to you." Caroline smiled to herself, not out of tenderness, but intuition. She knew that "I miss you" came with fine print. A mother's love moved her to open the door, but experience told her to tread carefully. "Come over tomorrow," she said, curt, but polite. And so began the path to the next test. There are battles that aren't fought out loud. Caroline understood that sometimes silence is a refuge, not a punishment. She retreated into herself, like someone wrapping themselves in a shawl to ward off the cold. The wound was still there, fresh, but she decided not to display it. Instead of seeking explanations, she sought calm. And calm isn't found on the street. She shut herself in her house, not as a prison, but as a sanctuary. Because a wise person knows that reacting in the heat of the moment is like lighting a fire in a dry field. It gets out of your control. And Caroline was not about to lose control. Her mornings filled with small rituals, brewing coffee slowly, looking out the window at the neighborhood's comings and goings, watering her plants. In those simple gestures, her soul breathed. The neighbors greeted her, and she smiled politely, giving no hint of her inner storm. You learn that sadness, when well kept, turns into strength. And although her heart demanded a confrontation, her head held her back. The silence wasn't cowardice. It was strategy. Caroline knew that, sooner or later, the truth would show itself. Inside, of course, the questions didn't stop. She remembered every moment shared with her daughter, every piece of advice, every sleepless night. The love she had invested seemed to have left no trace. At what point did the thread break, she asked herself, looking at an old photo. In that picture, Mia was smiling without reservation, hugging her at a picnic in Lincoln Park. Memory, sometimes, is cruel. It shows you what you were, so it hurts more what you are today. But Caroline didn't let herself dwell in nostalgia. She knew the past could be an anchor or a springboard, and she was going to choose the springboard. Like someone meditating without knowing it, Caroline began to observe more than she spoke. She watched how people, in their daily lives, fixed conflicts or buried them. At the grocery store, a couple argued about money. A minute later, they were laughing together buying bread. It taught her that pride can yield if the love is worth it, but also that some bonds aren't worth saving. The silence became a mirror where she saw her own strengths. And in that mirror, Caroline recognized she was stronger than she thought. Stronger and more patient. The nights were a different story. That's when the loneliness crept in under the door. Sometimes she'd stay up late reading. Other times she'd just listen to the radio, turned down low. Every song brought back memories, but also answers. My worth doesn't depend on an invitation, she thought, closing her eyes. And that, said in a low voice, was starting to gain weight. Because when you repeat a truth to yourself enough times, you start to believe it. Caroline was in that process. Don't think the pain went away. It transformed. It was no longer that sharp sting, but a constant weight, like a backpack you can't take off. But instead of letting the backpack bend her, she learned to walk with it. That, my friend, is earned wisdom. Not waiting until you're free of burdens to keep moving. In her notebook, she wrote down phrases she found in books, in conversations, on the street. They were reminders for when the temptation to explode appeared. I will speak when I have to speak, not when I am provoked. That was her new mantra. And while everything outside remained the same, inside something was growing. A determination that had nothing to do with revenge, but with self-respect. Caroline began to enjoy her own company in a way she hadn't in years. She rediscovered painting, slow cooking, walks with no destination. Life was teaching her that calm is also a power, and that sometimes the strongest action is no action. That calm would be her best weapon for what was to come, because she sensed that something, or someone, was about to test her again. The curious thing is that, in that silence, Caroline began to see signs. A message from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in years, a neighbor bringing over bread for no reason, small gestures that seemed to remind her, you are not alone. And those reminders, though simple, kept her heart warm. Her faith in people hadn't completely broken, but it had changed. Now she would only give it to those who knew how to care for it. That was the new rule, and she didn't plan on breaking it. Of course, Mia didn't appear, and Caroline, instead of suffering from the absence, began to observe it as a fact. The distance was a choice, and that said a lot. If the love was real, sooner or later it would make itself known. She wasn't going to force it. That phase was over. Now the power was in waiting from a place of serenity. And he who waits in calm observes better, and by observing, plans better. An entire month passed like that, with no visible drama. Caroline didn't discuss the topic with anyone, except in her prayers. She didn't look for allies. She didn't spread rumors. Silence was her shield and her strategy. In her mind, the story was still open. She was just waiting for the moment when the other party would show their cards. Because every person, sooner or later, does. And she was going to be ready. And one day, just like that, the phone rang. It was Mia, her voice cheerful. Mom, I need a big favor. Caroline listened in silence, measuring every word she heard. She wasn't surprised. She had sensed it. The silence had given her just enough distance not to give in to impulse. And although she didn't answer right away, she already knew this would be the test that defined everything. Her calm, at last, was about to be put into play. And Caroline was more than ready. The opportunities to set things right don't always arrive wrapped in bows. Sometimes they come disguised as an urgent favor. Caroline listened as Mia asked her for money for the honeymoon, with that sweet tone she had used since she was a child when she wanted something. But sweetness, to a wise ear, can also sound like calculation. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just let Mia talk. Because silence, in those cases, is like letting out line. The other person reveals themselves, and Mia revealed herself. She talked about exotic beaches, luxury hotels, and a once-in-a-lifetime moment for her and her fiancé. While her daughter spoke, Caroline remembered something no one else knew. In a safe in her study, she kept documents for an inheritance she had never mentioned. A large tract of land out in wine country, in California, valued in the millions, which had been a gift from her father before he died. Caroline kept it untouched, waiting for the right moment to decide who to leave it to. And that right moment was taking shape in her mind. She thought, love is measured in respect, and respect is measured in actions. If Mia wanted to ask, she would have to learn what it means to give. Not with money, but with something much more valuable. She agreed to help, but with one condition that sounded innocent. Of course, honey, I can finance the trip, but I need you both to accompany me to run an errand before the wedding. Mia, excited, agreed immediately, without asking what it was about. The fiancé also smiled, thinking of the beach and the cocktails. Caroline, inside, had already mapped out the scene. The errand was the reading of her will, a private event where her decisions would be made clear. The invitation wouldn't be a warning, it would be a revelation. A revelation she would never forget. The day arrived, and the atmosphere was almost festive. Caroline received them in her study, with coffee and pastries on the table. A short time later, her trusted lawyer arrived, a thick folder under his arm. Mia and her fiancé thought it was some routine paperwork. But when the lawyer began to read, the air changed. Caroline listened, unfazed, as assets, accounts, and properties were mentioned. And then, the sentence that cut Mia's smile short. The primary beneficiary will be the person who has demonstrated, through actions, respect and care for this family. Mia swallowed, trying to hide her discomfort. Caroline didn't look at her with reproach, but with a calm that weighed more than any scolding. The lawyer continued. Currently, the property in California will be designated to a charity that supports single mothers, unless the primary beneficiary meets the requirements stipulated in the next year. Mia asked in a thin voice, "What requirements?" Caroline replied, "Respect, honey. That's all. Respect." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain further. The silence filled the rest of the room. The fiancé, uncomfortable, pretended to check his phone. Mia tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Caroline remained firm, like a tree that doesn't bend in the wind. The message had been delivered, without any need for shouting or tears, and although she agreed to help with part of the trip, she made it clear that the support would not be unconditional. In Mia's eyes there was a mix of surprise, discomfort, and a little wounded pride. Caroline knew that blow wouldn't be easily forgotten, and that was the key, that she not forget it. What made this move different is that it didn't seek immediate punishment. Caroline wanted to plant something deeper, the awareness that actions have consequences. The land in California was symbolic. What was important was the value it represented. By making it conditional, she was holding up a mirror to her daughter, one she might not like to see herself in, but it was necessary. Love without clear boundaries is love that gets worn out, and Caroline's was not on sale. That night, alone in her room, Caroline reviewed the scene. She felt no remorse, no guilt. She felt peace, like someone straightening a picture that had been crooked for years. She knew Mia's reaction would come in the following days. It might be anger, it might be reflection. But the important thing was that the message had arrived, and the message was clear. Respect isn't requested, it's demanded. And she had just demanded it. The story didn't end there. It just changed direction. Caroline, in her calm, was ready to see how Mia would react. The support for the honeymoon was on the table, but not as a gift, as a bridge. A bridge that Mia would have to cross carefully, because on the other side wasn't just a property, but a bond. A bond that could be strengthened or broken forever. And that, dear friend, is what Caroline knew better than anyone. The choice was no longer in her hands. The sharpest truths almost never come from the person involved. Caroline was at the farmer's market, picking out tomatoes, when an old friend, Lauren, approached her with that look of someone bearing serious gossip. "Honey, I don't know if I should tell you this," she began, lowering her voice. Caroline, with that calm cultivated after many blows, encouraged her. "Tell me, whatever it is." Lauren swallowed. "The party. It wasn't an oversight. It was an agreement. His parents didn't want any awkwardness, and, well, your daughter agreed." That agreed stabbed her in the chest like an icy needle. Because it's one thing for others to exclude you, and another for your own blood to sign off on it. Caroline stood still, holding a tomato as if it weighed a ton. In the market, life went on, haggling, laughter, the calls of the bread vendor. But for her, the noise faded. Lauren's words echoed, more for the echo than the volume. They didn't want any awkwardness. "And what am I?" she thought. A lump in her throat. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't want the knife to go any deeper. She thanked Lauren and went on her way as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had definitively broken. At home, she left the bags in the kitchen and sat in silence. Now she understood Mia's silence, the evasiveness, the hurried tone. It all fit, but not as a solution, as a sentence. Caroline knew that respect isn't negotiated. It's either there or it isn't. And here, clearly, it was not. She remembered her father telling her, "You defend your honor, even if it leaves you alone." And that phrase, which used to seem exaggerated, now tasted like truth. A bitter truth, but truth nonetheless. "I'm not going to lie to her," she wept. Not the loud, scandalous crying, but the silent kind, the kind that burns inward. She allowed herself 10 minutes, not one more. Then she washed her face, looked in the mirror, and told herself, "I'm not going to ask for explanations I already have." Because asking for explanations is an invitation to be lied to, and Caroline had had enough of the truth. What came next wouldn't be confrontation, it would be a lesson. A lesson not taught with yelling, but with firm decisions, and she was ready to decide. Lauren came looking for her again a few days later. She told her that at the party they had commented that Caroline was too serious and wouldn't fit in with the family. Those phrases, dressed up as courtesy, were pure poison. Caroline listened without interrupting, with that cold smile that freezes. She didn't defend herself, she didn't attack, there was no need. Whoever knows who they are doesn't need to convince anyone, and she knew perfectly well who she was. The problem was that her daughter seemed to have forgotten. Instead of calling her to complain, Caroline began to plan. Not a plan for revenge, but a mirror. If Mia had decided to show everyone that her mother wasn't part of her world, Caroline would show her that that world also had a price not paid with money, but with actions. There was no rush. Patience was her ally, and patience, used well, is the most elegant weapon there is because it strikes when no one expects it. With every day that passed, the pain became more useful. Caroline molded it, refined it, like a musician tuning an instrument before a concert. That concert would be private, intimate, but unforgettable. The inheritance, the financial support, the closeness, it was all on the table, but under her rules. Clear rules, which Mia could not see coming. Caroline wasn't looking to humiliate her. She was looking to wake her up. And sometimes, the strongest awakening comes from the most subtle blow. She knew that moment would come soon. One night, while she was eating dinner alone, her phone rang. It was Mia, talking about the wedding, the plans, the dress, all in a festive tone, until the request came. "Mom, do you think you could help us out with the honeymoon?" Caroline felt a strange calm, like someone watching all the chess pieces align. This was the moment she had been waiting for. And she smiled, not from joy, but from certainty. The lesson was about to begin. Caroline listened to the entire request without interrupting. Mia spoke with enthusiasm, describing beaches, romantic dinners, and exclusive excursions. Every word painted a dream trip, paid for, of course, by her mother. Caroline didn't give a yes or a no. She just let the silence do its work, like someone letting a soup simmer on low heat. When Mia finished, there was that awkward instant where the other person waits for approval. Caroline broke it with a soft but sharp phrase. "Of course, honey. But first, I need you both to accompany me for something very important." Mia blinked, surprised. "Don't worry, it's quick," Caroline added, with a smile that left no room for questions. The fiancé, who was on speakerphone, chimed in. "Of course, ma'am, whatever you need." Caroline took a mental note. He agreed quickly because he suspected nothing. That something important wasn't a common errand, but a carefully planned act. She didn't mention it, gave no clues. She wanted the moment to arrive without warning, so the reaction would be pure. Surprise, in these cases, is the best mirror. Meanwhile, she treated the money issue as secondary. "We'll deal with the honeymoon after this," she said, closing the conversation. Mia agreed, confident, believing it was a formality. Caroline felt how the money tipped the scales in her favor. Not because of the money itself, but because the condition put her in control of the narrative. She wasn't going to confront with reproaches, she would do it with facts. And facts, when they are clear, leave no room for excuses. That was her plan. In the preceding days, Caroline kept the mystery intact. She was pleasant, conversational, as if there were nothing pending between them. This confused Mia, who was perhaps expecting some complaint. But no. Caroline knew that unease is a silent teacher. In her silences, Mia had to be wondering what her mother wanted. And that question, though she didn't know it, was already beginning to work on her conscience. Change, if it came, had to come from within. She was just setting the stage. When the day arrived, Caroline asked them to come to her house early. She received them with fresh coffee and pastries, like in the old days when the family was united. Everything seemed cordial, almost warm, but a light tension floated in the air, like electricity before a storm. The fiancé talked a lot, perhaps to fill the silences. Mia smiled, but her eyes searched for clues. Caroline, unfazed, led them to the study. "This is where I need us to be for a moment," she said, motioning to the chairs. The lawyer, an old family friend, was already waiting. On the table, a thick folder with perfectly ordered papers. Mia raised an eyebrow. "Is this about the wedding?" Caroline just replied, "It's about the future." There were no more explanations. The lawyer began to read a legal document in a measured tone. Each paragraph revealed properties, accounts, and one particularly valuable piece of land. The atmosphere changed, as if everyone had forgotten they had come to talk about a trip. Mia listened intently until the key phrase arrived. "These assets will be designated to whoever fulfills the values and respect toward the family, as determined by Mrs. Caroline within the span of 1 year." A heavy silence filled the room. Caroline looked at her, calm, without a hint of harshness on her face. "Everything in this life has conditions, honey. Love doesn't, but respect does." The fiancé swallowed hard, and Mia looked away. The blow wasn't about the money, it was about the message. And that message was engraved without any need for yelling. Caroline didn't ask for explanations. She didn't talk about the party. She didn't mention the agreement with the in-laws. There was no need. Her calm was more uncomfortable than any accusation. She knew that by not naming the offense, she forced the other party to carry it in silence. That weight, over time, does more than a momentary scolding. "We can continue with the trip planning whenever you're ready," she said, closing the folder, and she stood up, ending the meeting. That afternoon the house was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was satisfied. Caroline didn't need Mia to acknowledge anything out loud. The important thing was that she had understood. And deep down, she knew that this conversation would be remembered far longer than any party. Not because there was money involved, but because there was dignity. Dignity, which, like fertile earth, bears fruit only if it is tended. And Caroline had just planted a seed that would be hard to forget. Caroline knew that the most accurate blow isn't always the one that leaves a bruise. Sometimes it's the one felt in the soul, the one that isn't forgotten even as the years pass. So, after that meeting with the lawyer, she let Mia think everything was back to normal. She agreed to finance the honeymoon, but no longer as an act of blind love, but as a calculated stage. Why help? Yes, but without passing up the opportunity to leave a mark. She wasn't seeking public humiliation, but a private revelation at just the right moment. The kind of moment that forces you to look back and ask, "What did I do to get here?" And that moment, Caroline already had in mind. The plan began to take shape in the following days. While she coordinated with the travel agency and made transfers, she thought about the final detail. It wouldn't be money or jewelry or a costly souvenir. It would be something that weighed more than gold, the memory of everything she had given as a mother. She spent hours looking through albums, letters, children's drawings, old movie tickets. Each of those objects held a chapter of the story Mia seemed to have forgotten. Caroline wasn't going to wear herself out repeating it in words. She would leave it on the table to speak for itself. She prepared a wooden box, elegant but simple. Inside, she carefully placed photographs in chronological order, from Mia's childhood to her adult life. Between each photo, a brief, handwritten note. Memories of moments that had marked their lives together. Instead of signing Mom at the end, she signed with the date and place of each memory. It was a map of love, but also an X-ray of everything she had invested emotionally. There were no explicit reproaches, but the message was there, clear as water. Mia could ignore it, but she couldn't erase it from her mind, and Caroline knew that was the best lesson. The moment of delivery was also calculated. It wouldn't be at the wedding or before the trip. It would be at an intimate dinner, the night before they left. Caroline would invite them both, prepare a warm, even cheerful atmosphere. She would give no sign that there was anything beyond a cordial farewell. Because surprise is most effective when there are no defenses up. The blow had to feel like an unexpected mirror, one that forces you to see yourself without emotional makeup. During those days, Caroline maintained the same friendly demeanor. There was no room for suspicion. Smiles, travel tips, even restaurant recommendations. Mia seemed relieved, believing that everything was at peace. The fiancé, meanwhile, thanked Caroline with a somewhat exaggerated courtesy. She let it pass, without correcting, without accepting empty compliments. because well-executed plans don't need anticipated applause. The satisfaction comes when the final piece fits. And that piece was about to fit. In parallel, Caroline never stopped observing. Small gestures, glances, phrases tossed out. Everything confirmed that her daughter still didn't understand the magnitude of her failure. That didn't anger her. It strengthened her. Because she knew that life, sooner or later, gives us back what we give. And if Mia still couldn't see, it wasn't her job to scream it in her face. It was her job to put the mirror in front of her. The kind of mirror that, once you've seen it, you can't unsee. That would be her real gift. The chosen night arrived faster than expected. Caroline cooked her special dish, her famous lasagna, just like for Mia's birthdays. The table was impeccable. Embroidered linens, sparkling glasses, lit candles. Everything spoke of care and affection. Mia and her fiancé arrived on time, smiling, with the energy of someone about to live a dream. Caroline received them as always, with no clues of what was coming. Because the most accurate emotional blow is the one that arrives wrapped in affection. And that night, she was in control of every detail. The conversation was light at first. They talked about the weather, the itinerary, the final preparations. The fiancé thanked Caroline again and again for her generosity. She replied with short phrases, smiling, measuring the moment. Until, naturally, she said, "Before you go, I have something for you." She stood up, went to the study, and returned with the wooden box. She placed it in the center of the table, with a gentleness that contrasted with the symbolic weight it carried. "Open it," she said. Nothing more. The fiancé opened the lid, and Mia began to take out the photos one by one. At first, she smiled with some nostalgia until the written notes began to take effect. Each phrase, each date, each memory gave her back a piece of her childhood, her youth, her mother. Her eyes began to shine, not with joy, but with a recognition that hurts. The fiancé, in silence, watched her reaction. Caroline said nothing, explained nothing. Because when the message is clear, words are unnecessary. And there, in that silence, the lesson was complete. Mia looked up, but Caroline was no longer looking at her. She was pouring coffee as if nothing had happened. The atmosphere had become thick, heavy with what was unsaid. The fiancé murmured a thank you, sincerely, but Mia remained silent. That silence, Caroline recognized. It wasn't indifference, it was the silence of someone processing, and that was exactly what she wanted. Because poetic justice doesn't need witnesses, it just needs to leave a mark, and that mark was already made. The night before the trip, Caroline's house smelled like garlic and oregano. She had lit candles on the table, not for show, but to bring warmth to the moment. She wanted everything to seem like a loving farewell, as if nothing else were at stake. Mia arrived in a light blouse, perfect makeup, a wide smile. The fiancé, in casual slacks, carried a bottle of wine. They seemed relaxed, excited for what awaited them at dawn. Caroline hugged them as always, with that calm that was so confusing. Because calm, in the hands of someone who knows how to use it, is a silent weapon. The dinner proceeded with apparent normalcy. They laughed about old anecdotes, commented on the wedding preparations. Caroline listened more than she spoke, measuring every reaction. Mia seemed comfortable, sure that her mother had let go of the party incident. But Caroline hadn't forgotten. She had simply changed tactics. Instead of confronting, she was building a memory that would be tattooed. The fiancé, oblivious to the invisible tension, talked about the hotel, the tours, the beach. Caroline felt like she was listening to a song she had no interest in. It was after dessert when she decided to move the final piece. She stood up slowly. She went to the study and returned with the wooden box. She placed it in the center of the table, without a word. Mia frowned. "What is this?" "A gift for the trip," Caroline replied, sitting back down. The fiancé smiled, curious, and began to open it. The smell of polished wood mixed with the scent of the candles. And what was inside, more than an object, was a mirror of the past. Mia pulled out the first photo. Her, at 3 years old, dressed as a butterfly for a school pageant. On the back, a brief note. I sewed your wings all night so you could fly happily. She kept pulling out photos. Birthdays, Christmases, graduations, school trips. Each image was accompanied by a phrase that recalled a sacrifice, a gesture, a moment of love. The fiancé, who was smiling at first, slowly grew serious. Mia, on the other hand, seemed to be fighting to keep her composure. The entire box was a reminder of who had always been there and who had excluded her without hesitation. The silence became thick. Caroline poured herself coffee as if nothing was happening, letting the discomfort do its work. It wasn't necessary to explain anything. The photos spoke for themselves. Each page not only showed memories, but the contrast with the present. Mia got to the last photo and found a small envelope. Inside, a note written in a firm hand. Love is free, respect is earned. Nothing more, nothing less. Mia looked up, her eyes shining with something that wasn't joy. Caroline didn't look at her, focused on stirring her coffee. The fiancé was the first to break the silence. Thank you, ma'am. This is an important gift. Caroline smiled slightly, without responding, because she knew that polite words couldn't cover the emotional blow. That kind of blow isn't measured in immediate tears, but in the nights when it returns to your mind, unbidden, and she was sure Mia would have many of those nights. When they got up to leave, Mia hugged her mother tighter than usual. She said nothing, but the gesture was different, less mechanical. Caroline reciprocated without softening the firmness of her posture. She wasn't looking for instant reconciliation, but long-term respect. The fiancé thanked her again, avoiding eye contact for too long. Caroline closed the door after they left and took a deep breath. She didn't feel victory. She felt peace, because she had done the right thing, her way. On the table, the aroma of coffee and snuffed-out candles remained. The air still held an echo of what had happened. Caroline knew that on that trip, they wouldn't just be carrying suitcases and beachwear. They would also be carrying that box, and with it, the weight of a history that could not be denied. Maybe they would open it in the hotel room, maybe never again. But it didn't matter. The important thing was that the seed was already planted, and a seed like that, sooner or later, sprouts. The morning after the dinner, Caroline woke up early, as always. She made her coffee, opened the windows, and let in the fresh air. She wasn't expecting any calls, but she wasn't surprised when the phone rang. It was Mia, her voice different, slower, as if she were carrying something. "Mom, we're at the airport," she said, trying to sound cheerful. Caroline listened, responding with short phrases, leaving long gaps of silence. She didn't want to fill the air with words that would soften what needed to be felt. Sometimes, the echo of what isn't said weighs more than any speech. During the call, Mia avoided mentioning the box. She talked about the flight, the plans, the weather at their destination. But Caroline sensed in every pause and discomfort impossible to disguise. That was the real effect she was looking for. Not a fight, but a reflection that gnawed from the inside. There was no anger in her voice, just a calm that, for someone who feels guilty, is unbearable. Mia hung up with a brief "I love you," as if it hurt to say it. Caroline smiled to herself, not out of malice, but certainty. The lesson had begun to sprout. In the following days, silence became the protagonist. Caroline didn't call, didn't write, didn't ask for pictures of the trip. Mia sent short, almost mechanical texts. "We arrived safely. Everything is beautiful here." The fiancé sent a couple of pictures of landscapes, but without them in the frame. It was clear the box had left a mark that sun and sea couldn't erase. And Caroline, far from taking the opportunity to press the issue, let time do its work. Because time, when something is stuck in your conscience, is the best ally. Every day that passed, the weight grew. A curious detail arrived on the third day of the trip. Caroline received an email from the fiancé, thanking her for reminding us what truly matters. He didn't mention the box directly, but it was clear what he was referring to. Caroline replied with a simple, "I'm glad you understand." Nothing more. Because giving explanations dilutes the impact. And she didn't want to dilute it. She wanted it to keep burning, even in silence. The real change begins when the other person can't stop thinking about what they saw. When they returned from the honeymoon, the atmosphere was different. Mia came to visit her alone, without calling first. She walked in without the rehearsed smile, with a more serious, almost humble expression. She sat at the kitchen table and said, "Mom, I know I wasn't right." Caroline didn't respond immediately. She just looked at her, inviting her to continue. Mia took a deep breath and went on. "I can't change what I did. But I want you to know I thought about it every single day. That I thought about it every single day was worth more than any rehearsed apology. It was the sign that the message had done its job." Caroline didn't rush to hug her. Instead, she said in a calm voice, "Respect is shown with consistency, not in a single moment." Mia nodded, lowering her gaze. There were no tears, no drama, just a silent agreement. Caroline felt a peace she hadn't felt in months. Because dignity isn't about winning a fight, it's about reclaiming the place that belongs to you. That place isn't requested, it's taken, with firm and silent actions, and that was exactly what she had done. The relationship didn't go back to the way it was, but maybe that was for the best. There was less blind trust, but more care in their gestures. Caroline noticed Mia included her in conversations, consulted her on small decisions. It wasn't an immediate transformation, but it was a change in direction. A change that started with a box and a sentence. The sentence that Mia would probably hear in her mind for a long time. Love is free. Respect is earned. And that was, fundamentally, the true inheritance. After all, Caroline wasn't looking for her daughter to adore her, but to respect her. And respect, she knew well, isn't achieved with sermons, but with clear boundaries. She never again mentioned the engagement party or the agreement with the in-laws. That chapter was closed, not because she forgot it, but because she had transcended it. Inside, she felt that life had given her the chance to put things in order, and she had taken it without falling into the temptation of lowering herself. That, for her, was a silent victory, one that needed no applause. In the following months, Mia maintained a different demeanor. It wasn't perfect, but it was more conscious. She no longer took for granted that her mother would always be available or that support would be automatic. Caroline noticed small gestures, a call for no reason, a "how did you sleep?" text, a visit with no agenda. Small threads that, day by day, wove something new between them. Not bonds as strong as before, but more genuine ones. Caroline's resentment transformed into something lighter. Not because she forgot, but because she had learned to let go. What Caroline valued most now was peace. A peace that came from knowing she had acted from a place of dignity, not impulse. She looked at her garden and thought that relationships are like plants. If you water them too much, they drown. If you neglect them, they dry out. She had found the middle ground, and in that balance, she felt secure. She no longer needed her daughter to include her in everything. What she needed was to know that when they were together, it would be by choice, not obligation. And that, slowly, was happening. Caroline also began to put more energy into herself. She resumed her travels, signed up for a pottery class, went out with lifelong friends. She discovered that her world didn't revolve exclusively around Mia, and that having her own life was, in fact, the best way to teach others to value her. She didn't do it for revenge, but for self-love. A self-love that was now firmer than ever. One that protected her from pain and kept her centered. That was her invisible shield. On one occasion, Mia mentioned the box again. She did it timidly, like someone opening a delicate subject. "Mom, we took it on the trip, and we looked at it several times," she confessed. Caroline just smiled. That's what it was for. She didn't ask what they felt or what they thought. She didn't need to know. The effect was already achieved, and that was enough. Because the box wasn't a punishment, but a reminder. One that would still be there, waiting for the moment Mia wanted to open it again. Time passed, and one day, Mia arrived with an invitation in hand. It was for a family dinner at her house before the wedding. "I want you to come." "It wouldn't be the same without you," she said, looking her in the eyes. Caroline accepted, but without euphoria or resentment. She didn't see it as a total repair, but as a step in the right direction. One that might not have happened without that night and that box. And in that instant, she understood that it wasn't about punishing, but about inspiring change. And sometimes, change needs a strong shake. The wedding arrived, and Caroline attended without high expectations. She enjoyed herself, chatted, danced a couple of songs. There were no sentimental speeches or theatrical gestures. Just a mother, present, enjoying the moment without forgetting who she was. That was her greatest achievement, continuing to be herself, with or without others' approval. In the photos, her smile was genuine, not forced. Dignity isn't seen, but it's felt. And at that wedding, Caroline wore it like the finest of dresses. With time, she understood that the real triumph was in having managed the pain without letting it consume her. The box, the will, the conditions, it had all been part of a lesson in respect. Not to punish, but to teach, and above all to teach herself that she could love without losing herself. That was the legacy she wanted to leave, that a mother's love is vast, but not infinite, and that respect is the only thread that keeps it alive. Caroline, looking at her garden, smiled. Life, she thought, always returns what you sow. And she had sown dignity. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel invisible in your own family? Tell me about it in the comments and let me know where you're listening to this story from. And if it moved you or made you think, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss more stories full of emotions, unexpected twists, and life lessons that speak to the heart.